The aisle hummed with ordinary life. Carts squeaked over polished tile. Freezers purred in a steady chorus. Boxes of cereal stacked in cheerful rows made a bright canyon of color that promised prizes and sugar and cartoons. In the middle of all that harmless noise, a small hand rose into the light. Sophie's hand was steady, though her breath was not. Thumb tucked against her palm, fingers folding down one by one. Her eyes did not move. They were fixed ahead, as if staring into the shape of a safer world only she could see. Officer James Daniels recognized the signal before his mind formed the words. Training surfaced like a reflex. He had seen it in slides in rooms that smelled of coffee and dry erase marker. He had told himself he would never miss it in the wild. He did not miss it now. He felt the world narrow into a clear corridor, everything else dulling around the edges. The fluorescent lights above flickered once, a heartbeat of static, and then held steady. He left his cart, a plastic basket with coffee and paper towels and a magazine he had not read, and stepped forward with his palms visible and empty. He did not shout. He did not pull his badge. He lowered himself to the level of the child so his voice could travel the short distance between them without drawing the attention of the man at her side. His knees pressed to cool tile. He could see the faint freckles scattered across her nose, a constellation he would never forget.
"I see you,"
said Daniels, his voice a warm thread.
"You did the right thing. I'm here."
Sophie blinked. Relief flashed across her face so quickly it could have been a trick of the light. Then the man's hand tightened around her wrist. He was tall and wide through the chest, a wall more than a person to anyone smaller than him. Tattoos peeked beyond the sleeve of his shirt, snaking down to rough knuckles. He had the face of a man who had learned to bend rooms to his will. To anyone watching from a distance, he could have been a father in a hurry. Up close, the lie frayed.
"We gotta go,"
the man said, looking past Daniels as if he were only a shelf to be navigated around. His tone tried for casual and landed on brittle.
"Mom's waiting in the car."
Daniels rose, slow enough to be non-threatening, fast enough to stand between the child and the pressure of that hand. He smiled at Sophie with a kind of steadiness he had rehearsed in darker places than this. She held his gaze like a rope.
"What's your name?"
said Daniels. The man answered.
"Her name's Fine."
Daniels kept his eyes on the girl.
"My name is James. What's yours?"
Sophie's mouth opened. The man's fingers pinched down. The answer died unspoken. Her eyes flicked to the ceiling camera and then returned to Daniels, a tremor moving through her as if a gust had found her bones.
"The snack aisle is busy,"
said Daniels, the sentence plain and ordinary and meant for the radio clipped to his shoulder.
"Aisle 9 is busy."
He angled his body so his microphone could catch him without changing the calm of his face. Dispatch would understand. Nearby employees would understand. The intercom could buy seconds no one else would think to count. The man's eyes sharpened. He tilted his head, calculating. He did not like the way an officer's mouth could say soothing things and still move the chessboard. "We gotta go," he repeated. Lower now, pulling Sophie with more force. The cart he had been pushing fishtailed and swung into a display. Boxes of cereal toppled like bright dominoes, skittering over the tiles. A child in another aisle laughed, unaware, and then fell silent at the break in adults' voices. Daniels took a half-step closer and opened his hands wider. He pictured how this could go wrong in 7 different ways. He saw 3 ways to keep it from breaking. He chose one.
"Let's slow down,"
said Daniels.
"What's your name, sir?"
The man smiled without his eyes and said nothing. He turned his body so that Sophie was between them, a thin shield made of smaller bones and heartbeat. His gaze flicked to the end of the aisle where an emergency exit door waited underneath a red sign. The metal push bar was dull from years of hands that had not needed it. Sophie lifted her chin a fraction, enough to show the stripe of skin at her throat pulsing with fear. She looked at the door and then back at Daniels, apology already there for something she had not done. Daniels pivoted to keep her in his line of sight. The overhead lights hummed louder, or his blood did. Over the store's quiet music, an employee's voice broke in over the intercom, sounding both careful and brave.
Code blue at aisle 9,
The voice said.
managers to 9.
The man flinched. It was a small flinch that said everything. He threw the card aside, cereal skidding like cards on a table, and hauled Sophie toward the red sign. Daniels moved. The distance was the length of a long breath. He reached for the bar with one hand and for the man's wrist with the other, but the angle and panic did their own math. Metal met palm. The bar depressed. The world pulled in a held breath as if the store itself knew what came next. The hinge of the emergency door groaned a warning of old springs resisting a bad idea. The alarm was a second away from waking. It woke. The scream of it rolled down the ceiling in a wave that made every head turn. The man shoved through the opening, forcing Sophie ahead, and the late afternoon sun grabbed the edge of her hair and lit it like a small flame before the door swung wider. Daniels lunged after them, radio already alive with questions he would answer later. The door banged the wall and bounced, shrieking. The noise burned the ordinary out of the air. Beyond the door, bright heat waited, and the echo of running feet. The chase had begun. The loading bay smelled like cardboard and lemon cleaner. Pallets made low walls that cast pools of shadow on the concrete. The alarm bleated on with a stubborn insistence that made speech feel like pulling sound through syrup. Workers in safety vests froze, eyes wide, hands hovering over the routines of their day as if they had been paused by an unseen remote. Daniels pushed through the door and shouldered it back with the heel of his hand, letting it swing closed to dampen the alarm's scream. He moved into the bay on soft feet, not because he wanted to be quiet for the man, but because quiet was how he heard small things. He heard the scrape of rubber soles on concrete, the sharp hitch in a child's breathing, the low curse of a man who did not like being followed. He lifted the radio to his mouth, eyes tracking the direction of the sounds.
9-1 detail,
Said Daniels.
emergency exit breach at the rear loading docks. Possible child abduction in progress. Male adult, heavy build, tattoos on forearms. Child female, approximately 7. Name Sophie. I am in pursuit through the back of house. Request units to South Lot, East Entrance, and all camera eyes to the rear bay. Initiate internal lock on the front doors if safe to do so.
Copy.
Came the voice in his ear.
Units en route. Store manager notified. Do not engage alone if suspect armed.
A forklift sat idling, key left in the stem by someone who trusted the patterns of his day. Daniels cut a diagonal between it and a stack of shrink-wrapped paper towels taller than he was. He could feel the man's path like a warm line. People in flight left something behind, even when they thought they did not. Breath, heat, sound, the slight change in the way air moved. At the far end of the bay, the metal roll-up door stood open to a rectangle of sunlight that made everything behind it seem underwater. The man dragged Sophie toward that light, his grip punishing in its certainty. She stumbled and then righted herself, small shoes tapping out a rhythm of panic. She turned her head as if the motion were a forbidden luxury, and found Daniels with a look that was both question and plea.
I'm here.
Said Daniels, his voice low, meant for her.
Keep going. I see you.
A stock clerk stepped out of a side door with a pallet jack and stopped dead. He took in the scene in one gulp. The man's jaw flexed. He did not like witnesses gathering. He yanked Sophie faster. Cardboard skidded, a mop bucket tipped. Dirty water slid across the concrete in a thin lake that mirrored the ceiling lights. Daniels stepped into the water without breaking pace. Cold soaked through the fabric of his shoes and set his skin aching. But all sensation existed on a second layer of reality now, beneath the urgency that ruled his limbs. He angled to the right to keep from crowding the man into doing something desperate. He did not pull his gun. The risk calculus was too loud, and a blade was more likely here than a firearm. He did not know yet. He wanted to buy time to know. The intercom crackled above them, the manager's voice trying to be calm.
Attention customers, please remain where you are. Store associates will assist you. Parents, keep your children with you. Do not approach the rear of the store.
The man glanced up toward the sound like he might snarl at an invisible room. He pushed Sophie hard enough to lift her feet for a heartbeat. She landed with a small sound she could not stop. Daniels filed the sound in his chest where it would not be forgotten.
James,
She whispered, barely audible over the ambient thrum of machinery. He heard it. He heard his name in her mouth and felt a quiet rage move through him. Not red, cold, the kind of anger that sharpened his focus instead of fogging it. He closed another yard and let his palms show again. He changed the cadence of his voice so it would slide under the man's noise.
Sir?
Said Daniels, as if they were two men in a parking lot talking about something that had gone wrong with a car.
This is not the way you want this to go. Stop now and we can talk. You know how this ends if you don't.
The man half turned, eyes darting to the door and back. He looked at Daniel's hands, at the distance between them, at Sophie's face. A flicker of something crossed his features, not doubt, but a memory. He shook it off and barreled forward.
Mom's waiting,
He said loud, for anyone in earshot who might give him cover with their ignorance.
She's scared. We're late.
Daniels heard boots pounding behind him. A stockroom supervisor and a teenage bagger, faces pale. He got a look at them without taking his body off the line.
Back!
Said Daniels, a single command that carried the shape of authority.
Lock the next door behind me. Clear the path and stay out.
They obeyed, grateful to be told what to do in a world that had turned suddenly into a test. The supervisor peeled away to hit a switch that sent a metal grate grinding down over a side door. The bagger hauled the mop bucket upright and dragged it out of the way. Sophie's shoulders hit the edge of the light as they reached the open roll-up. The sun took her in entirely now, laying a gloss on her hair and turning her into a small bright target no one should ever have to be. Beyond her stretched the loading zone, a strip of asphalt and white-painted lines leading to the wider parking lot. A dumpster stood to the left like a hulking green witness. Heat poured off the pavement in visible waves that made distance look liquid. The man shot his gaze over the lot, choosing a vector. His eyes snagged on a row of cars in the south lane and then on a white van 2 aisles over, canopy rack on top, door cracked wide like a mouth waiting to swallow. Daniels saw where the man saw. He saw the way the center of gravity in the man's body shifted toward the van.
Units be advised,
Said Daniels into his radio as if he were commenting on a weather front instead of the shape of this moment.
Possible target vehicle is a white cargo van south-southeast of the loading dock. Side door open. Engine may be hot. I am moving to intercept.
Copy, said dispatch.
2 minutes out.
2 minutes was both forever and not nearly enough. The man thrust forward, and Sophie stumbled again. She caught herself on the rough edge of a pallet and then on her own certainty. She pressed her lips together in a fierce line. She looked back once more, quick and fierce like a fox peeking from brush. Daniels gave her the smallest nod. The smallest nod said everything. It said, keep breathing. It said, keep thinking. It said, you are not alone. They crossed the threshold into the unfiltered day. The alarm behind them fell to a muffled cry as the heavy door settled to rest. The outside air wrapped them in heat so complete it felt like stepping into a hand. The man set his jaw, picked a path, and ran. Daniels followed, every stride measured, every exhale a count. The parking lot opened like a board laid with pieces. The next move would define the whole game. The first 10 yards were chaos made of predictable parts. Shopping carts chained in a line rattled under the touch of a sudden hand. A gull cried from the lip of the roof. A woman pushing a stroller froze with one wheel angled off the curb and pulled her baby back towards shade with shaking fingers. A man in a ball cap reached for his phone and then thought better and stepped behind a pillar. Sound telescoped down to the hiss of breath and the slap of shoes. The man drove left to use a row of SUVs as cover. He did not run like a stranger to this kind of sprint. He ran like a man who had chased what he wanted and did not trouble himself with what broke along the way. His grip on Sophie was a clamp that said her bones were not relevant to the outcome he had chosen. Sophie did not spend herself on thrashing. She saved herself. She looked down and made a map of the ground so she would not fall. She counted steps like a metronome to keep panic from drowning her. At the 9th step, her shoe scuffed something small and bright. A tiny sparkle popped up in an eye of the sun, then tumbled and flashed again. It was the heart charm on her keychain, the one Claire had given her on a morning when the world was softer. Sophie let the keychain fall. She let it bounce once, twice, and roll into the shallow gutter near a parking block. She did it without breaking stride. She did it so that when the world became story later, there would be a line someone could follow backwards to find the choice she made. Daniels saw the glint. It was the kind of detail he would have seen even on bad days when his head was loud, but today it was as if the world wanted him to catch it. The heart made a small sound that only the part of him listening for a child could hear, a tick of metal against concrete. He marked the place in his mental map and kept moving. He would collect it when he could and hand it back to her as proof that he had seen her in every second of this.
South lot,
Daniel said into his radio.
Suspect moving between rows 3 and 4, approaching white cargo van. Child is conscious and ambulatory. No visible firearm. Possible blade present.
Units 1 block out,
Came the reply.
Do you have a plate on the van?
Negative on plate.
Said Daniels.
Doors open. Engine noise present.
He lengthened his stride and adjusted his line to cut off the last 5 yards between the man and the van. The asphalt breathed heat through the soles of his wet shoes, bringing back the cold lemon water of the mop bucket as a ghost against his skin. He filed the sensation away as part of his body's background noise. He did not let it move the needle on his choices.
Sir?
He called, the word plain and edged with the kind of insistence that made men look.
Stop. This is your moment to do the right thing.
The man did not look. He shoved forward and used the hood of a sedan to pivot, his free hand braced on hot paint, his bare forearm blooming to pink. He yanked the van door wider with a metallic rattle that sent a hard shiver through the panel. The interior yawned like a mouth, empty of cargo but littered with the evidence of days spent in motion. A coffee cup in a plastic console, a sweatshirt thrown on the floor. A pair of jumper cables coiled like a sleeping snake. Daniels closed the last distance and went high on the hinge side of the door to keep it from becoming a swinging weapon. He put his shoulder into steel and drove it toward close. The man whipped the door back, and the muscles in his forearm jumped in his skin. Sophie's breath quickened. Daniels heard it and let his own slow to counterbalance it, the way you slow your steps when walking with someone whose legs are shorter. The man snarled a half-word that had no letters in it and reached for his belt with his free hand. A glint of metal flashed at hip height. Not a gun, a blade, box cutter, $5 kind, sharp enough to make blood a louder argument than words. Daniels set his stance and let his left hand hover open at chest level. His right hovered just inches from the holster that stayed closed. He saw a triangle of risk made of the blade, the child, his center line. He kept his voice low and close.
You don't want to do this,
said Daniels.
You know where this ends. You walk away from this with a charge you can manage, or you drive it into a place you can't come back from. Think about her.
The man's eyes flicked to Sophie's face and then to the parking lot, where sirens were not yet visible but could be heard as a promise. He bared his teeth.
She's mine,
he said. The words ground down to their hardest edges. Sophie stiffened. A muscle under her eye flickered. The word mine had a flavor she knew, bitter and old. A sedan 2 rows over started and then cut its engine. Its driver deciding his need to leave was smaller than the need to stay out of something that sounded like a life cracking open. A crow called from the roofline and launched into the hot air, a small black piece of night moving across day.
Units pulling into the south entrance,
the radio said in Daniels' ear.
Advise.
Hold perimeter,
said Daniels.
Do not spook the suspect into the roadway. We're at the white van, row 3. I am front left of the door. Child is between us. Blade in right hand. No blood present.
He shifted his stance a hair to the right and watched the man try to read whether that half-inch meant something larger. Every small change could mean safety or panic in this geometry. The man tightened his grip on Sophie's wrist. She sucked air and made no other sound. The blade stayed at his hip. He pressed his chest to her shoulder blade and used her body as a shield. The cowardice of it coiled in the way his muscles moved.
Let her step behind me,
said Daniels.
If you want to speak, speak to me. If you have a claim, make it to me, not through her.
The van's engine ticked, cooling or waking. Daniels could not tell. A heat mirage wobbled above the hood like the road itself was breathing. The man lifted his chin like a man about to make an announcement in a room he believed he owned. His voice leaped by a register to fill the space.
She's my daughter,
he said. You can't take her from me. Somewhere, in the lot, a murmur went up. The sound a crowd makes when given an excuse to believe a simpler story. The word daughter had a power in it that could fog good judgment for a second or two. The second or two was all a desperate man needed. Sophie froze. The nickname that came next reached across years and landed on her like a hand she did not want.
Peanut,
the man said, his voice suddenly soft and sweet and wrong.
Tell the officer you're coming with me.
Her eyes flicked, not to him, but to Daniels. She did not speak. Her silence was a declaration more eloquent than any word.
Daniels, do you copy?
Came the radio, the voice not quite able to hide its own pulse.
Backup is here.
He did not take his eyes off the triangle of blade and child and door.
I copy,
said Daniels. He shifted his weight to his front foot. The next second would either open a path to reason or to something sharp. The man's jaw flexed once. He made his choice. He shoved Sophie toward the mouth of the van. The van's interior smelled like sun-baked plastic and old coffee. The step-up was a small cliff for 7-year-old legs. Sophie's sneaker skidded on the ridged floor, and she caught herself with her palms. The shallow abrasions bloomed pink, and she pulled her hands back and tucked them against her chest as if she could hold her skin together by will alone. Daniels moved with the turn of the door and got his shoulder inside the swing so it could not close without closing on him. The panel screeched in protest. He felt the bruise already forming and decided a bruise was cheap.
Don't,
said Daniels. And the word was not a shout. It was something steadier, the kind of sound a man uses to call a scared dog out from under a porch, coaxing it with patience that does not waver. The man's eyes cut to Daniels and then to the building and then back. He lifted the box cutter high enough for the light to catch the blade's neat little teeth. He did not bring it near the girl's throat. He did not need to. The idea of it was the threat. He knew how to turn a possibility into a prison.
Get back,
said the man.
I have paperwork. You want to see it? I have it. She's mine.
We'll look at whatever you have,
said Daniels.
but not with you between her and the door. Step away from her.
The radio at Daniels's shoulder hissed and then quieted. His name, swallowed by the sound of tires on heat-softened tar. He kept his eyes on Sophie and let words wrap around them both.
Sophie,
Said Daniels, using her name like a hand he could give her to hold.
look at me.
She did. Her pupils were wide. The skin around her eyes was tight. She was very still. Even stillness had a temperature, and hers had climbed past what a child should have to carry. He gave her a nod that meant this was not the end of the story.
You left me no choice.
The man said to Daniels, anger bending his words into shapes he liked better than the truth.
Her mother poisoned her against me, but blood is blood.
He said the last sentence the way men say phrases they heard in rooms where no one told them to be better. He squared his shoulders like he expected the world to salute the idea. A patrol car slid into view at the south edge of the lot, moved deliberately to block an exit lane, and stopped. The officer inside set his elbow on the window frame and did not climb out. The choice telegraphed coordination, not panic.
Hold position.
Daniels said into the mic with bare movement of his jaw.
Do not rush the van.
The man heard the word van and twitched. He grabbed Sophie around the upper arms and pulled her more fully inside, trying to put sheet metal between her and anything that could take her back. Sophie's heel found the van's rubber matting. She set it down with stubborn care, as if to say there were things she would still do on her own terms. She looked at the corner of the console where a plastic cup sat. The cup had a lid with a slit and a stray straw pinched black with old soda syrup. A fly wandered the rim as if indifferent to the gravity of the afternoon.
Listen to me,
said Daniels to the man, his tone the opposite of the scene's speed.
There is a restraining order in place. You know that. You know the penalties. Put the blade down, step out, and we'll sort the papers with witnesses present. You can tell your side. You cannot do it with metal in your hand and your arm around a child. Every second you keep it there is another second we will enter into the record. You cannot want that.
The man's eyes clouded and cleared. Reason broke across his face like light through moving water, showing itself and then hiding. He was a man split cleanly by his own wants. Daniels recognized that split. He had seen men live in it for years, convincing themselves the cut in them was what made them strong.
What did she tell you?
The man said. A sudden turn toward pleading.
She told you I hurt them. She told you stories. You don't know. You weren't there.
Daniels did not argue facts he could not unfurl in this moment. He did not give the man a stage to perform on. Sophie, said Daniels, cutting a thin path through the noise.
Can you slide your left foot back down to the ground, just your left?
The man's head snapped toward Daniels. He tightened his grip and used his cheek to press against Sophie's hair, as if he could become her shelter by pressing hard enough. The gesture looked like love to anyone who wanted to believe it. To Daniels, it looked like a vice.
You don't tell her what to do.
The man said, heat spiking his voice.
She listens to me.
Sophie's left foot found air. She steadied, toes reaching for something solid and finding only heat. She brought it back inside. The small act of defiance was the size of a breath, and it mattered. A baby cried from a few rows over, and the cry shivered into the space around them and made everything feel more human and more fragile. A breeze caught the corner of a plastic grocery bag and sent it tumbling end over end across the asphalt like a small ghost. The world continued, stubborn and ordinary, while this fine point of danger sharpened. Daniels adjusted his stance again, inching toward a line where his reach would be something he could rely on. His shoulder ached under the door's weight. He played through the mechanics of a disarm with a blade in his head, placing Sophie's body in the diagram with care.
Back up in position.
the radio said.
Do you want a stun option on your left?
Negative.
Said Daniels.
Too much risk of contact transfer to child. Hold.
He kept his eyes on Sophie. She had stopped trembling. The trembling had turned into something else, something like resolve, brittle and new. She breathed through her mouth now, quieter, her chest moving shallow and quick. He could see her counting again, numbers like beads on a string.
Peanut.
The man said, his voice turning toward the tone that had once gotten him what he wanted.
Tell the nice officer you're coming. Tell him you love your dad.
She swallowed hard, her lips parted. She closed them again. She shook her head once, so small only a man looking for it would see. The man's fingers began to dig, the anger at being refused rising like heat from a grill. The box cutter lifted a fraction higher. The angle changed from idea to threat.
Mark,
Said Daniels, putting the name in the air to claim it as part of the real story.
you take that blade higher and you change everything. Put it down.
The name landed. The man's eyes slivered. He did not like being called into the clear. He preferred rooms where words could be fog. He pressed Sophie sideways, using her to push Daniels off the hinge. Daniels rolled his shoulder under the door edge and held his ground. The metal complained. A second patrol car slid into the far edge of the row and stopped. The officers inside angled their vehicle to create a funnel that narrowed the world toward the van. No siren, no shouted commands, just geometry that limited bad choices. Daniels drew a breath deep enough to steady a grown man. He made his voice intimate and sure, pitched to the small circle that held only 3 people. "Sophie," said Daniels.
I'm not moving. I will be here until you step behind me. When I say now, you're going to duck your head, turn your shoulder, and step to me. I will not let him close the door between us.
Her eyes met his again. She gave the smallest nod. He saw her courage like a fragile bird landing on a branch that could hold more weight than it knew. The man's grip tightened in anticipation of movement he did not yet see. He was not watching her feet. He was watching the blade because he loved the feeling of holding something sharp more than he loved the responsibility that came with it. Daniels felt the moment line up. A series of small tumblers clicking into place, he lowered his center of gravity. He began to speak the word that would start the next turn in the game. The van's engine ticked louder in the heat. A single bead of sweat slid along Sophie's temple and fell to the rubber mat like the softest rain. He opened his mouth to say now. The van's sliding door rattled in his shoulder like an animal flexing in a trap. And then the world leaned toward its hinge.
Now,
Said Daniels. Sophie ducked her head, turned her shoulder the way he had told her, and slid one foot toward the light. The man jerked her back hard enough to knock the air from her. Her heel scraped the rubber mat, squealing like a small animal. The blade lifted a finger's width, and Daniels froze the rest of the world inside the space of that silver line. A shopping cart clattered nearby. A man in a ball cap, thinking he was helping, pushed it between cars to block a lane. The cart wobbled and rolled crooked, the front wheel squeaking as if nervous. Daniels reached without looking, dragged the cart by its side rail, and slammed the wheel against the van's front tire. The metal frame shuddered, then settled. It would not keep the van from moving forever, but it would steal seconds, and seconds were the only currency that mattered. The man saw the cart wedge and bared his teeth. He yanked a folded sheaf from the van's console and shook it like a small flag.
I told you,
Said the man.
she's my daughter. Here, read it.
He held the paper up with the hand that did not hold the box cutter. Sophie stood rigid against his ribs, her breath shallow and hot. The paper trembled, not from fear, but from the friction of rage moving through him. His voice boomed across the row of cars so bystanders could hear the sentence he wanted them to repeat later.
You can't take her from me.
He said.
The court said.
the court said no such thing.
Said Daniels. keeping his voice even.
Put the blade down.
A woman 2 cars away shaded her eyes with one hand and squinted at the document. From a distance, a legal sheet looked like any other legal sheet. Black lines, official tone. The woman took a half step forward, uncertainty loosening her mouth.
It looks official,
Said the woman.
Officer, maybe let him.
Ma'am,
Said Daniels, without taking his eyes off the triangle of blade, child, and door.
please step back. We'll verify documents with dispatch. Do not approach.
The woman came to her senses and stepped behind her open door, one hand at her throat as if steadying a glass she could not afford to drop. The man puffed himself taller, mistaking the woman's confusion for momentum. He jutted the paper forward.
Say it.
He told Sophie, using a voice he saved for rooms where he had the only set of keys.
Tell him you're coming with me. Tell him I'm your father.
Sophie did not say it. She stared at the paper, then at the small grease stain blooming in the top corner where his thumb had pressed it for too long. Her eyes moved to Daniel's. The look told him she remembered a courthouse hallway where her mother cried into a sleeve that smelled like laundry starch and fear, and a judge who said words too big for a child to carry, but not too big to understand.
Units on scene.
The radio said near Daniel's ear.
South lot perimeter in place.
Hold,
Said Daniels.
we have a blade and a child as shield. He has produced a document. I will not confirm or deny here. Have records pull all filing on subject Mark Johnson, 38, last known address.
The man's jaw jumped at the sound of his name coming from a stranger's mouth.
And run an immediate status on protective orders.
Said Daniels.
Advise when verified.
Copy.
Said dispatch.
Record searching.
The man shifted his grip on the paper. The top page curled. A small tear opened where the fold had been pressed too often. He thrust it closer to Daniels as if proximity could cure what was wrong in the lines.
Read it.
Said the man.
Right now.
We're not doing law at knife point,
Said Daniels.
not with her in your arms.
Sophie's face had stopped trembling. Something else had replaced it, something like a small plank she had decided to stand on no matter how the river rose. She looked at the van's cup holder, then at the open door where Daniels's shoulder held back the world, then at the small space between the man's forearm and his ribs.
Peanut.
Said the man softly, swinging the nickname like a pendulum.
Tell the officer. Tell him the truth.
My name is Sophie.
She said. It was quiet, but it carried. The name set itself down between them and took root. The bystander with the ball cap lifted his hands, palms out, apology written in his shoulders. He backed away, eyes wide.
Sir,
Said Daniels.
step your right foot back and set down the blade. Then hand me the paper. We will read it together with witnesses and with her out of your arms.
The man's eyes filmed over, then cleared. He licked his lips as if about to tell a story he had told himself so often it had become a substitute for the past.
She's mine.
He said again, tired and bitter and final.
I won't say it again.
You already said it.
Said Daniels.
It doesn't make it true.
The radio crackled.
Records for Johnson.
Said dispatch, voice clipped.
Active restraining order filed 3 months ago. Renewed 1 month ago. Full custody granted to Claire Miller. No visitation rights. Order specifies no contact within 100 yards of child and mother. Copy on file.
The words fell into the hot afternoon like steel ball bearings on glass. The crowd's murmur changed shape. Doubt thinned. The woman by the door put a hand over her mouth and made a sound that might have been a prayer. The man's nostrils flared. For a heartbeat, the blade dipped, gravity remembering itself. Then anger lifted it again, as if anger could cancel physics. He grabbed Sophie higher, pulled her tighter, and shifted his weight onto the ball of his foot. He dragged the knife's small teeth into the light. The moment shattered into sharp pieces. The box cutter rose towards Sophie's throat as the crowd sucked air and the world paused on the edge of the cut.
Mark,
Said Daniels, steady as a metronome.
put the blade down now.
The man's eyes flicked left, then right, measuring exits, counting badges, weighing how much fear he could harvest from the people watching. The box cutter hovered close enough to make the idea of a wound feel like the first taste of copper on the tongue.
You talk like you know me.
Said the man.
You don't.
I know a lot about today.
Said Daniels.
Today there is an order. Today there are witnesses. Today you decide whether you walk to a car or go face down on asphalt. I want you to walk.
The word walk did something to the air. It was plain. It was human. It made an image even in a mind ruled by fight. Mark swayed almost imperceptibly. His grip softened for a half-second. Sophie felt it. She shifted her weight as if to test whether the hold was a net or a wall.
Peanut,
Said Mark, snapping the softness shut.
don't move.
Sophie,
Said Daniels.
I'm here.
Her name from Daniels was the opposite of the nickname in Mark's mouth. It was not a hook, it was a hand. The radio hissed.
Advise,
Said a voice.
we have 2 officers to your left flank with beanbag and taser. You call it.
Negative on deployment.
Said Daniels, keeping his jaw still.
Contact risk to child. Maintain perimeter and stay hands low. I'm going to talk him down.
You think you're the good guy.
Said Mark, his voice skidding between sneer and plea.
Men like you always do.
I think she deserves not to be cut.
Said Daniels.
That's the full content of my opinion.
The bystanders had become a ring of faces trying not to be a ring. Some filmed, shame already mixing with their fear. A store employee in an apron edged forward with a hand up to stop the people filming. The apron had a smear of chocolate on it that looked, at first glance, like blood. Daniels cataloged the misread and let it go. Mark, said Daniels, returning to the only 2 facts that mattered.
The order is active. You know what that means. You know the word felony. You know the word prison. Put the blade down and you give your lawyer a day to work with. Keep it up and you give him nothing.
Mark's breathing went shallow. He wanted the story where he was a father ripped from his child by men who did not think he measured up. He wanted to say the word mine and have the world become straight around it. The paper in his hand was a prop he had over-rehearsed. Now the audience had turned their chairs.
Claire poisoned her against me.
Said Mark.
She turned her into a liar.
Claire protected her.
Said Daniels.
That's what the court said. And now I'm protecting her too.
Mark's mouth twisted. He blinked against the sun. Sweat crawled down the side of his face and into the corner of his eye. He did not wipe it. He needed both hands, one to hold the lie, one to hold the blade.
Talk to me,
Said Daniels, taking half a step. Small enough to be a conversation, not a move.
Tell me why this is the hill you want to die on.
Because she's mine.
Said Mark, the word mine breaking down. It had been sanded so smooth by his own use that it couldn't grip anything. The wind shifted. The grocery bag ghost tumbled away. A truck horn sounded far off on the highway. Life suggested it would continue whether or not this piece of it broke. Daniels did not accept that suggestion.
You're going to hear a word in a second.
Said Daniels.
You're going to hear me say now. When I say it, you will take your right hand off that blade and you will open your fingers. The blade will fall. Then you will step back. She will step toward me. We will separate you. You will live through the next 5 minutes. That is the best possible version of this scene.
Mark's eyes found Daniels's. For a blink, there was a kind of animal loneliness in them, like a dog left on the side of the road recognizing the sound of its own name on a stranger's tongue. It did not last. Anger washed back in. He pressed the box cutter close enough that its shadow touched Sophie's skin. Sophie made no sound. She stared at Daniels and moved her lips so only he could read them.
I can do it.
He gave the smallest nod. "Mark," said Daniels.
I am not moving. I am talking. You still have a choice.
A patrol sergeant on the far edge lifted both hands, showing empty palms, letting the picture reach Mark's eyes. No rush. No rush. No rush. Officers at the perimeter angled their bodies to look less like walls and more like people. "Peanut," said Mark, his voice sharpening with panic he did not want anyone to name.
Say you want to come with me.
Sophie said nothing.
Say it.
Said Mark, louder now. Sophie closed her eyes for a heartbeat, then opened them. When she spoke, her voice was so small it felt like a secret she was giving the world.
I want to go home
Said Sophie,
with my mother.
but the sentence lit Mark's fuse. The blade twitched, his grip crushed down. He sucked air through his teeth as if sucking would pull control back into his lungs.
Now,
Said Daniels, his voice low and clean. A blade of sound meant to cut only the right thing. Mark jerked the blade up as Sophie twisted her shoulder, and the space between harm and safety narrowed to the width of a breath. Sophie dropped her weight forward, exactly as Daniels had coached her without words. The motion created a pocket of space between Mark's chest and her back. She drove her shoulder down and to the left, a child's version of a turn a boxer makes to slip a punch. The blade's edge skimmed over the air where her neck had been and found nothing but heat. Daniels moved. He didn't explode, he flowed. He slid the van door along his shoulder to steal its swing, ducked his head under the lip, and came in at a low angle that put his sternum below the blade's travel. He reached for the wrist that held the box cutter with his left hand, while his right sliced up to strike the nerve bundle behind Mark's elbow. The strike was not loud. It was the sound a door makes when it clicks into its latch. Mark snarled, more surprise than pain. His hand spasmed, the blade dipped. Sophie did the thing that would change the rest of her life when she thought about courage. She turned her head, bared her small teeth and bit the meat of Mark's palm. She bit like a creature that wanted to live. The bite was not theatrical, it was honest. Mark yelped and yanked. Daniels torqued the wrist, leveraging bone against bone, and drove Mark's thumb into the handle's ridge. The box cutter sprang outward and clattered to the mat. It made a tiny sound that everyone would later remember louder. Daniels kicked it under the van seat with the edge of his shoe. He did not take his eyes off Mark's hands.
off.
Said Daniels, voice like a command he had learned in another life for a dog that had a mouth too strong for its own good.
Hands off her.
Mark lunged with his free hand, trying to scoop Sophie back. Daniels cut the motion off with a forearm across Mark's biceps, pinning the arm to rib. He rotated his hips, borrowed Mark's momentum, and turned them both so his own spine stayed between Mark and the girl.
Sophie, behind me.
Said Daniels, not loud but big. She slid under Daniels' elbow like water finding a channel and stumbled into light. Two uniforms moved in synchrony, one stepping between Sophie and the van, the other shepherding her to the open shade behind a patrol car. The officer who took the first step kneeled to Sophie's height and said, "I've got you." And she believed him because his eyes were soft and his hands were steady. Mark thrashed. He got a hand on Daniel's shirt and ripped a line of buttons free. Fabric popped like small firecrackers. The radio cord yanked, then held. Mark swung his head like a man trying to butt through a fence. Daniels tucked his chin and took the impact on the hard part of his skull. Stars flashed at the edge of his vision, small and white. He let them float there and did not follow them.
Left,
said the sergeant, and a second officer moved to Daniels's left hip without crowding. Daniels heard the steps, felt the presence, adjusted his stance to make space. He sank his weight. He felt Mark's center tilt, and he rode the tilt down. Asphalt rose to meet skin.
Hands,
said Daniels. Mark said it.
A word that had no meaning but hurt.
He tried to make fists out of air. He found only pavement. The second officer captured his wrist and rolled it flat. A cuff kissed the metal ring against bone. The sound was tiny and final.
Other hand,
said the sergeant. Mark twisted. He got his elbow under his chest and tried to launch himself like a man who thought his body could still be a weapon divided into parts. Daniels took his forearm and folded it backward, applying pressure until the joint spoke the language all joints understand. The second cuff clicked. The chain whispered between them. A brief silver bridge. The parking lot exhaled. The sound of breath leaving 100 lungs at once made a hush that felt like the first moment after a storm when you realize the house is still standing. Sophie peered around the patrol car door. Her hands were open and empty and shaking. The officer with her said, "Stay with me," and planted himself like a tree. Mark went still. The stillness was not surrender. It was a calculation interrupted. He turned his head and found Daniel's face. He looked straight through the man who had taken the blade from his hand and the child from his arm. He found the thin seam in the future where a threat might fit.
This isn't over,
said Mark. He said it almost gently, a man making a vow to himself.
Do you hear me? I'm coming back for her.
you're not,
said Daniels. It wasn't a retort. It was a fact spoken into the air.
Not today, not ever if I can help it.
The sergeant leaned into the frame of the open van and swept his eyes through the interior. He came up with a roll of duct tape, a hooded sweatshirt, an energy bar wrapper, a phone charger, and a plastic folder with creased corners. He passed the folder to a detective who had arrived without anyone noticing, because real detectives move like thoughts.
inventory it,
Said the sergeant.
photograph before you touch.
An EMT in a navy polo approached Sophie, slow and speaking in sentences like stepping stones.
I'm Max,
He said.
I'm here to make sure your body and your breath and your heartbeat are all the way okay. Can I look at your hands?
She held them out. The abrasions on her palms had darkened to a dry blush. Max dabbed them with a wipe that smelled clean. Sophie flinched at the sting and then held still. Max blew on each palm as if breath could cool what chemicals had warmed.
Do you want water?
Said Max. She nodded. He gave her a bottle and backed away just enough to let space grow. The woman, who had doubted the paper earlier, stood with tear tracks drying on her cheeks. She pressed her hand to her chest and whispered, "I'm sorry," to no one in particular and to everyone at once. Daniels stayed in the pocket of the scene until he felt the weight shift from him to the team. Then he looked toward the store's front doors, as if expecting the past to walk out and into the present. It did. Claire came at a near run, guided by a manager in an apron, flanked by an officer who had held the crowd at the doors. Her hair was pulled back without the comfort of a mirror. Her eyes had the glassy sheen of a person holding too much fear for too long. She saw the patrol car, the small girl behind it, and the shape of her own body changed. It softened and stiffened at the same time, as if love and defense were two halves of the same muscle.
Sophie,
Said Claire. The name tore out of her as a sob and a song. Sophie's head snapped. She dropped the water bottle and ran. They hit each other like the tide hitting shore. The sound they made was not pretty. It was animal. It was home. Mark watched over his shoulder from the ground where he lay chained to his choices. The look on his face was not regret. It was hunger. He lifted his voice enough to reach the edges of the moment he had lost.
I'll be back,
Said Mark.
You can't keep her from me.
Daniels stepped into the line of that sound and took it out of the air before it could reach the girl.
You are done,
Said Daniels. The officers lifted Mark to his feet. He tried to find dignity and found only weight. They walked him to the cruiser. He ducked his head without being told. The door closed with the thump of a story that will not end today, but will not go the way he had written it. Sophie pressed her face into Claire's neck and breathed the scent of laundry and skin and the lemon of a dish soap Claire liked. Claire rocked once, twice, and then held still, because stillness felt like proof.
Thank you.
Claire said through tears, not to one person but to every pair of hands that had kept the world from getting worse. Daniels nodded. He did not say you're welcome, he said, you're safe now. A gull circled once and cried. The siren downshifted to silence. A breeze found the sweat on Daniels's temple and cooled it. He reached into the shallow gutter by the parking block and picked up a small heart-shaped keychain. He brushed grit from its face with his thumb. He walked it over to Sophie and held it out.
You dropped this,
said Daniels. Sophie took it like a medal. As Mark was loaded into the cruiser, he leaned forward against the seatbelt and whispered to the glass, "She's still mine." Words meant for himself that slipped into the world like a promise the story would have to answer. The fluorescent light in the precinct lobby buzzed with a tired hum that sounded like a long afternoon coming to rest. The air smelled faintly of coffee and copy paper. A corkboard held flyers about neighborhood meetings and free car seat checks and an announcement about a blood drive with a photo of a smiling nurse that did not look much like anyone's nurse. Claire sat on a bench with Sophie pressed to her side. Their shoulders touched from collarbone to elbow. Sophie picked at the corner of a gauze pad on her palm with her thumbnail, and then stopped when Claire's fingers found hers and stilled them. A styrofoam cup of water sweated on a side table. The ring of moisture it left looked like a small eclipse. Daniels finished his report line by line, the way men finish old chores, even when their minds are still half in the field. He described the gesture in aisle 9. He described the path through the loading bay. He marked times, distances, locations, angles, witnesses, the color of the van, the weather. He checked boxes that existed so stories would not evaporate once the heat went out of them. He wrote the words restraining order with neat letters that did not shake. He stood and felt his back tell him what it thought about an hour of tension. He stretched once, quietly, and walked to the bench.
How are you feeling?
Said Daniels.
Tired,
said Sophie.
Safe.
Said Claire, and then, as if the word required proof,
I am safe.
You are,
said Daniels.
We've booked him. There will be a hearing. The DA will file charges. We'll issue a no-contact order on top of what already exists. We'll coordinate with victim services for home safety and with the school for pickup protocols.
Claire nodded. She had the look of a woman cataloging steps not because she loved steps, but because steps were the only way to keep the floor from falling away. She touched Sophie's hair and tucked a piece behind her ear. The girl leaned into the touch as if it were a kind of gravity she chose.
Thank you.
Said Claire, looking up at Daniels.
For seeing her.
I promised myself I would,
said Daniels.
And I'm glad I did.
A dispatcher walked past with a stack of printouts and stopped.
They're already calling,
she said. A smile that had relief in it, fighting with professionalism.
Parents, the store posted about the signal on their board. People want to know what it is. Some didn't. They do now.
Good,
said Daniels.
We'll put together a reminder. Posters. A social post that doesn't scare kids, but teaches them.
The dispatcher nodded.
We'll make the message gentle,
she said.
And loud.
Sophie's eyes found the corkboard. The papers were rectangles without meaning until one of them took shape. A flyer with a hand drawn in outline, fingers folding over a thumb. Someone had pinned it crooked, and the pin had slipped, so the paper sagged by one corner. It looked tired. It also looked like hope.
Did I do it right?
Said Sophie, very quietly.
You did it perfectly,
said Daniels.
Will he come back?
Said Sophie, even more quietly. Daniels did not lie. He looked at Claire and then at Sophie. He chose honesty that would not feed fear.
We will do everything to make sure he doesn't,
said Daniels.
We will watch. We will respond. We will make a plan.
Claire exhaled. The sound was long and thin, like a string being unwound from around a heart. She nodded.
When you left the store,
said Claire to Sophie.
When you couldn't find me, what did you think?
I thought,
said Sophie.
that I had to be loud with my hand.
Claire laughed and cried at the same time. She pressed her forehead to Sophie's and let a few tears wet their skin. A knock sounded at the front desk. A uniformed officer gave Daniels a look that meant he had something to hand off. Daniels excused himself and walked to the counter. The officer set down a small manila envelope.
This just came in through the slot,
said the officer.
No return. No name.
Daniels weighed the envelope in his hand. It was light. Paper inside and nothing else. He slid a finger under the flap and drew out a single white page. The page had one line typed in a font chosen by a man who did not know fonts but wanted to look like he did. She is still mine. Daniels felt his jaw tighten. Not fear, focus. He turned the paper and found nothing on the back. He slid it into a plastic sleeve and wrote the time across the top with a black marker. He handed it to the detective, who took it between two fingers like it might smear.
Pull camera,
said Daniels.
Front door, back alley, any place a hand could reach our slot. Log the time. Check for a car that rolled slow. This is not a guess. This is a man talking to himself and trying to make us listen.
The detective nodded and carried the sleeve away. Daniels let his breath go. Slow. He looked back at the bench. Claire had cupped Sophie's face in both hands and was telling her a story about a day at the beach where the waves had knocked them down, and they had laughed. Sophie smiled because the memory had sand in it and sunscreen and a gull that had stolen half a sandwich. Daniels walked back.
Can we go home now?
Said Sophie.
You can,
said Daniels.
We'll send a car by tonight and tomorrow, unmarked. We'll connect you with a counselor who knows how to talk about days like this. We'll give the school a password that only you and your mom know. You'll practice saying it. It will be a game, but it will matter.
Sophie nodded, the seriousness of the plan making her feel large in her own skin. She slipped the heart-shaped keychain into her pocket and tapped it with 2 fingers, like a secret handshake with herself. Claire stood. She thanked the dispatcher, the sergeant, the officer at the desk, the world. She held out her hand. Daniels shook it. Her grip was firm and human.
You saved her,
said Claire.
She saved herself,
said Daniels.
I watched and helped.
They walked out together. The evening had come on, softer than the afternoon, the heat relenting. The sky was the color of a bruise healing. Streetlights clicked on one by one like small choices being made. At the curb, a patrol car idled to see them home. The officer at the wheel lifted his fingers from the steering wheel in a small salute. Claire opened the back door. Sophie climbed in and buckled herself. She looked out at Daniels through the glass and lifted her hand. Not a signal, a wave. He lifted his hand back. The car pulled away. Inside the precinct, the corkboard poster about the silent signal had been straightened. Someone had centered it and pressed the pin in hard. It held. Daniel sat down at his desk and wrote one more line in his report. It was not about law or time or angle. It was about a hand and an eye and a choice. He wrote it for himself. Sometimes the loudest cry for help is silent. The night crew filed in. The lobby hummed, a phone rang and was answered. The machine of safety continued to turn. On a side table, under a stack of printed flyers, lay an empty manila envelope with a crease along one edge. It waited, a shape without a voice, for the next hand to move it where it needed to go, Outside, the street breathed. A dog barked once and then fell quiet. Somewhere, a woman locked a door and checked the chain. In the back of a cruiser, a cuffed man stared at his reflection in the dark window and saw only himself. At the far end of the hallway, the detective held up the plastic sleeve with the single malicious line. He nodded to Daniels through the glass. They would find the camera angle. They would find the car. They would walk the next steps. The last light over the corkboard flickered and steadied, humming like a promise. And in a small apartment across town, a girl slept with her mother's arm across her, the heart-shaped keychain warm in her fist.